The hum of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was something Dr. Monique Carter knew well, though rarely from the vantage point of the departure concourse this early in the morning. It was just past 6:30 a.m., the air heavy with the mingled aromas of strong coffee and freshly baked pastries from the food court. The cavernous terminal bustled with travelers dragging wheeled suitcases, some moving briskly with practiced efficiency, others shuffling in sleepy resignation toward their gates. Beside her, Lila Carter clutched the handle of a carry-on bag decorated with bright stickers and a small stuffed rabbit's ear peeking from the zipper. At 7 years old, Lila was at that perfect balance of curiosity and caution, old enough to know airports meant exciting adventures, but still young enough to stay close to her mother's side. Her dark curls bounced as she skipped a half step to keep up. "Do you think we'll see the clouds from above today, Mommy?" she asked, tilting her face up. Monique smiled, squeezing her daughter's hand. "I think we'll be so high, you might feel like you can reach out and touch them." It wasn't just a trip. Monique had been invited to speak at a pediatric surgery conference in San Francisco, an opportunity to present a new surgical technique she had developed, one that could save countless children's lives. It was professional recognition hard-won through years of late nights, meticulous research, and battles for funding. And it was also one of the rare times she could bring Lila along, blending work with the kind of personal memory-making her daughter deserved. At the SkyWest Airways check-in counter, the agent looked up from the screen with a smile. "Dr. Carter, you've been upgraded to first class today. Both tickets." Monique blinked. "First class, are you sure?" "Absolutely. It's a complimentary upgrade for your loyalty status." The agent slid the boarding passes across. "Enjoy your flight." Lila's eyes went wide. "First class? Like in the movies?" Monique chuckled. "Yes, but remember what we talked about, inside voice, good manners." "Yes, ma'am," Lila said solemnly, though the excitement in her eyes gave her away. As they made their way toward the gate, Monique felt a small swell of satisfaction. Her career hadn't been without sacrifices. Her family, rooted in a small Georgia town, had never quite understood her choice to pursue medicine. They had seen her long hours and missed gatherings as proof she'd chosen ambition over family duty. Yet here she was, taking her daughter across the country, not just to work, but to show her a bigger world. Boarding began on time. The jet bridge echoed with the muffled clatter of rolling bags. Lila's steps were light, her head turning to take in everything. Uniformed flight attendants greeting passengers, the subtle scent of coffee from the galley, the plush leather seats of the first-class cabin. Their seats, 2B and 2C, were by the window. Settling in, Monique stowed their carry-ons and helped Lila adjust her seatbelt. She glanced at the man in 2A, across the aisle, a broad-shouldered man in a simple navy shirt and khaki pants reading a paperback. He looked up briefly, nodding politely before returning to his book. There was something steady in his demeanor, as if nothing in this busy cabin could ruffle him. The calm didn't last long. A tall man in a perfectly tailored gray suit appeared in the aisle, his silver hair immaculately combed, a sleek leather briefcase in hand. His boarding pass dangled between manicured fingers as his gaze swept the row. The faintest downturn of his mouth hinted at disapproval. "I believe you're in my seat," he said to Monique, his tone cool. Monique held up her boarding pass. "I don't think so. We're in 2B and 2C. The man glanced at his own pass. 2D, he muttered, as if the paper had betrayed him. Without apology, he slid into the seat beside Monique and immediately pressed the flight attendant call button. Lauren Brooks, a blonde flight attendant with a practiced smile, appeared. "How can I help you, sir?" "I'd like to change seats. I'm not comfortable with my seating arrangement." Lauren's eyes flickered, taking in Monique and Lila. "I'm sorry, sir. The flight is full." "Perhaps someone in coach would appreciate an upgrade," he suggested, voice dropping slightly, but still carrying enough to be heard. "I'm afraid that's not possible after boarding without a valid reason. Lauren replied, her smile fixed. The man gave a huff of displeasure and opened a laptop, effectively putting up a wall between himself and the mother and child. From 2A, the man with the book, Ethan Cole, shifted his gaze, watching the exchange without comment. His years as a Navy SEAL had taught him to recognize the subtle tension before trouble began. Monique focused on Lila, who was now studying the in-flight magazine. "Look, they have a map of where we're flying," she said, trying to keep her daughter's attention away from their seatmates' obvious discontent. The boarding finished, the cabin filled with the gentle hum of air vents and the rustle of passengers settling in. As the plane began its slow taxi toward the runway, the man in 2D leaned slightly toward his laptop, speaking just loudly enough to carry, "First class isn't what it used to be. They let anyone in these days." Monique felt the sting of his words but kept her gaze forward, checking Lila's belt again. "Some people wake up on the wrong side of the bed," she whispered to her daughter. Ethan heard it too. He recognized the look in Monique's eyes. Not fear, but the weary bracing for more to come. He'd seen it in villages overseas, in the faces of people who knew they'd been marked for disdain by someone with power. Lauren began the beverage service. "What can I get for you ladies?" she asked with warmth. "Apple juice, please," Lila said. "Water for me, thank you," Monique added. A faint snort came from 2D. "Apple juice in first class," the man murmured, shaking his head. Monique kept her expression neutral, but Ethan noted the tightening of her shoulders. He'd seen parents in combat zones adopt that same protective posture. As the plane lifted off, the clouds began to spread out beneath them, white and endless. Lila pressed her nose to the window, momentarily lost in wonder. For now, the cabin was peaceful. But the undercurrent was there, just beneath the surface, waiting for the smallest jolt to bring it surging up. The first 20 minutes of the flight passed in a gentle rhythm. The engine's steady hum became a kind of white noise, lulling the cabin into a comfortable stillness. Outside, the morning sun spread a golden sheen across the tops of the clouds, and for a little while it was easy to believe this would be an ordinary trip. Lauren moved gracefully down the aisle with the beverage cart, her pleasant voice offering coffee, tea, or juice. Monique sipped her water, glancing at Lila, who was happily flipping through the glossy pages of the in-flight magazine. Across the aisle, Ethan closed his book but kept it in his lap, his gaze occasionally drifting to 2D. Years in service had taught him to note small tells, a tapping foot, a tight jaw, that signaled someone was simmering beneath the surface. When Lauren reached 2D, the man didn't look up. "Scotch neat," he said curtly. "And for you, ma'am?" Lauren turned to Monique. "Water, please. And apple juice for my daughter." Lila's eyes brightened as Lauren poured the drink into a small plastic cup. "Thank you," she said softly. The faintest scoff came from 2D. "Apple juice in first class," the man muttered again, as if the words themselves were an indictment. Monique felt the comment land, but she kept her attention on Lila. Ethan caught the exchange, his brow tightening. He'd seen that kind of targeted belittling before, small, deliberate pricks meant to undermine. The plane had reached cruising altitude when the first bump came, a quick, sharp drop that made several passengers grip their armrests. The fastened seatbelt sign chimed on overhead. Lauren's voice came over the intercom, calm and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We're experiencing a brief patch of turbulence." The next jolt was harder, tilting the beverage cart slightly. Monique instinctively reached for Lila's apple juice to steady it, but the cup slipped from her fingers at the same moment the aircraft pitched. In a slow, almost surreal arc, the amber liquid lifted from the cup, sparkling briefly in the sunlight before landing directly across Rick Hanover's pristine suit pants and the open keyboard of his laptop. The reaction was instant. "You little brat!" Hanover's voice boomed through the cabin, startling several passengers into looking up. Monique was already reaching for the napkins Lauren handed her. "I'm so sorry. It was the turbulence. Let me help you clean that." "Don't touch me," Hanover snapped, jerking away from her outstretched hand. Do you have any idea what this suit cost? Of course you don't. His words were sharp, cutting in a way that had nothing to do with fabric or laundry. Monique's cheeks flushed, more from the implication than the volume. "Sir, it was an accident," she said firmly. "My daughter is only 7. Hanover leaned back slightly, a smirk ghosting across his face. "Maybe if you knew how to teach your child some manners, but I suppose that's asking too much from certain people." The words "certain people" hung in the air like smoke, acrid and impossible to ignore. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd heard that tone in places far from any polite society where the words were cruder, but the intent the same. Lila shrank into her seat, her lower lip trembling. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "Well, you did," Hanover shot back, his voice dripping with contempt. Lauren stepped in, her professional smile looking suddenly strained. "Sir, please remain seated. The seatbelt sign is on." Hanover ignored her. "I want them moved out of first class. I'm being harassed." Monique's fingers curled into her palms. "You are not being harassed. You're being unreasonable toward a child." Ethan shifted in his seat. He wasn't a man who sought confrontation in civilian life, but every instinct in him told him this was a situation worth watching closely. Lauren tried again. "Sir, the flight is full. There's nowhere to move them." Hanover's eyes narrowed, and he leaned toward Lila. "Crying now? Typical." Monique felt the heat rise in her chest. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "I think you know," Hanover said softly, the corner of his mouth turning up in a private, ugly smile. Lila's small voice broke through the tension. "I'm sorry about your clothes." She reached into her carry-on and pulled out the stuffed rabbit. "Maybe Hoppy can make you feel better. He always helps me." For a brief moment, something flickered in Hanover's expression, then vanished. His hand shot out, knocking the rabbit from her grasp. The toy tumbled into the aisle as Lila recoiled, eyes wide in shock. The cabin went utterly still. Lauren gasped softly. Monique pulled Lila close, her heart pounding. Across the aisle, Ethan set his book aside completely. His posture straightened, his eyes locked on Hanover. He didn't move, not yet, but every part of him was alert. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, their gazes dropping to magazines or phones, pretending not to notice. The silence was as telling as the act itself. Monique's voice was steady, but edged with steel. "Do not touch my daughter again." Hanover leaned back in his seat, unbothered. "Teach her some manners, and I won't have to." The hum of the engines filled the pause that followed, but the air in the cabin felt charged, as though the turbulence outside had seeped into the people inside, and Ethan knew, without question, that this was only the beginning. For a brief stretch, the cabin settled into an uneasy quiet. The hum of the engines and the occasional clink of ice in glasses were the only sounds that filled the space. Lauren had retrieved the stuffed rabbit from the aisle and handed it back to Monique without comment. Lila held it close, her small fingers gripping its soft ear as though it were a lifeline. Monique smoothed her daughter's curls and spoke in a low, reassuring tone, but Ethan could tell her calm voice was a conscious effort. Years of reading people in high-stress situations had made him sensitive to the difference between true ease and practiced composure. Across the aisle, Rick Hanover typed on his laptop, the keys clicking sharply under his fingers. His posture was relaxed, but there was something in the set of his jaw that told Ethan this man wasn't finished. Ethan had learned, in combat and in life, that some confrontations dissolve with time, but others, when pride, prejudice, and entitlement were involved, only waited for the next spark. And Hanover struck him as a man who thrived on sparks. The fasten seatbelt sign was still lit, though the turbulence had subsided. Passengers settled back into their routines. A man in row 1 reading the financial section, a woman in row 3 quietly knitting. To an untrained eye, nothing seemed amiss, but Ethan's training kept him alert. Monique leaned toward Lila. "Why don't you look out the window for a while, sweetheart? See if you can spot another plane." Lila nodded, wiping at her eyes, though the faint tremble in her shoulders lingered. She turned toward the view, where the endless stretch of clouds was tinged with the soft glow of late morning light. Ethan's thoughts drifted, unbidden, to a dusty village half a world away, where he'd once watched a man of means belittle a boy for no reason other than the child's family name. The memory had stayed with him, not just for the cruelty of the act, but for the way the bystanders had looked away. That quiet complicity had felt as wrong as the insult itself. Hanover shifted in his seat, glancing at Lila and then at Monique. His gaze lingered in a way that wasn't overtly threatening, but carried a weight of disdain. It happened quickly. Lila, perhaps hoping to smooth things over, turned back toward him. Her voice was small but sincere. "I'm really sorry about your clothes, sir. It was an accident." Before she could finish, Hanover's hand shot out. This time, it wasn't a dismissive swat. His closed fist connected squarely with the side of her face. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried, the kind of muted impact that seemed to suck the air from the room. Lila's head jerked back, her eyes wide in stunned disbelief. A thin stream of blood began to run from her nose, stark against her light shirt. For one heartbeat, the cabin was frozen. No one moved, no one spoke. Then Monique's voice broke the stillness, a cry that was equal parts outrage and fear. "You hit my baby!" She fumbled for a napkin, pressing it gently to Lila's face as tears welled in the child's eyes. Ethan's pulse quickened, but his mind was steady. Years of training had drilled into him that action, without assessment, could make a bad situation worse. But this wasn't a situation that could wait. He had already cataloged the details. Hanover's aggression was escalating, not subsiding. The victim was a child, now visibly injured. The flight crew's authority had failed to contain him. Ethan rose from his seat in one smooth motion, stepping into the aisle. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, but carried an unmistakable command. "Sir, you need to remain in your seat and keep your hands to yourself." Hanover turned toward him, surprise flickering into irritation. "Who do you think you are?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved closer, placing one hand lightly but firmly on Hanover's shoulder. When the older man tried to jerk away, Ethan shifted his grip into a controlled restraint hold, effective, secure, and designed to immobilize without injury. The movement drew startled gasps from nearby passengers. Lauren, momentarily frozen, reached for the intercom to call the captain. Hanover hissed, his voice low but venomous. "Get your hands off me." "You assaulted a child," Ethan said, his tone still level. "You're not going anywhere until we land and the authorities meet the plane." The restraint hold was second nature to him, pressure applied at just the right points to discourage resistance. He wasn't angry, not in the way Hanover was. His was the controlled focus of a man doing what needed to be done. Around them, phones appeared in hands. Passengers who had pretended not to notice earlier now leaned into the moment, recording. Ethan didn't mind. Documentation was a friend to the truth. Monique held Lila close, whispering reassurance even as her own hands shook. The girl clung to her mother, her small body trembling from shock and pain. The captain emerged from the cockpit within minutes, assessing the scene with a quick glance. "We're diverting to Denver," he announced to Lauren. "Level 2 security situation." Hanover sputtered in protest, but Ethan's grip held steady. Inwardly, Ethan felt the faint, grim satisfaction of a mission objective clearly defined: protect the vulnerable, neutralize the threat. But he also knew this was only the visible skirmish. The real battle, the one that would matter, was still ahead, and it wouldn't be fought in the air. As the plane banked toward its unscheduled landing, the weight of Hanover's glare pressed against him. Ethan met it without flinching. Because in his mind, this wasn't just about a seat in first class or a spilled drink. It was about something deeper, something he'd seen too many times before. The belief that some people's comfort mattered more than others' safety. And as long as he was standing, he wasn't going to let that belief go unchallenged. The landing in Denver was firm but steady. the jolt of the wheels on the runway breaking a silence that had lasted since Ethan restrained Rick Hanover. No one applauded. There was no mood for that. Instead, passengers exchanged uneasy glances, whispering in hushed tones. As the aircraft taxied to a remote corner of the tarmac, police vehicles and an unmarked sedan waited with engines running. Through the oval windows, their flashing lights painted brief streaks of red and blue across the cabin walls. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came over the intercom, "please remain seated. Law enforcement will be boarding shortly." Monique sat with Lila in her lap, the child's face resting against her shoulder. The napkin pressed to her daughter's nose was spotted with dried blood. Lila had stopped crying, but her small hand still clutched the stuffed rabbit like a talisman. Ethan remained standing in the aisle, one hand on Hanover's shoulder, keeping the restraint firm but not cruel. He knew how it looked, calm, controlled, but inside, a quiet readiness still thrummed in his veins. When the officers boarded, Hanover's voice rose instantly. "This man assaulted me. I demand he be arrested." The lead officer's eyes flicked to Lila's bruised face, then back to Ethan. "Sir, please release him. We'll take it from here." Ethan complied, stepping back with his palms open. This passenger struck that child twice, the second time with a closed fist. There was a flicker of acknowledgement in the officer's gaze, but also something else. Caution. "We'll need statements from everyone." Hanover straightened his suit jacket, even with his cuffs askew. "My attorney will be here within the hour. You're making a very expensive mistake." Outside the aircraft, the winter air was sharp, carrying the scent of jet fuel. Hanover walked between two uniformed officers, not in handcuffs. Ethan noticed that, but with enough distance to suggest formality. Before he even reached the waiting sedan, Hanover pulled a phone from his inside pocket. "Get me Martin. Yes, now," he said into the receiver. His tone was smooth, almost bored, as if arranging dinner reservations. A pause. "I need this handled. She's a pediatric surgeon at Grady Memorial. Single mother, African American. There will be leverage. Find it." He stepped into the sedan without looking back. The door closed and the car pulled away, leaving only the faint swirl of exhaust in the cold air. Ethan had seen many kinds of threats. The quiet ones, he thought, were often the most dangerous. 2 hours later, Monique and Lila were in a small conference room at Denver PD, giving their statements. Lila spoke softly, answering the detective's gentle questions. Monique's account was precise, her voice steady despite the fatigue pressing at her temples. In the adjoining room, Ethan gave his own statement. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. When they regrouped in the hallway, Detective Maria Morales approached Monique. "He's already been released," she said, her tone heavy. "Bail posted within 30 minutes. Monique's brow furrowed. "That fast?" "Some people have the right friends," Morales replied. It was only the beginning. The first call came as they were checking into the airport hotel that evening. Monique answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end didn't identify itself. "Drop this. If you push charges, we'll make sure you lose your medical license. Think about your daughter." The line went dead. Ethan, standing nearby, read the look on Monique's face before she spoke. "Threat?" She nodded, her hand tightening on the room key. He exhaled slowly. "That was quick." "It's not just quick," she said. "It's surgical." By morning, the story had leaked online. Not the truth, but a version shaped to Hanover's advantage. Headlines read, "Wealthy executive harassed by unruly child in first class." Accompanying articles hinted at emotional instability in the child's mother, citing unnamed hospital sources. Monique stared at the screen in disbelief. "This is his doing." Ethan leaned over her shoulder. "He's controlling the narrative." The hashtag #Justice for Lila appeared in the corner of the trending sidebar, started by an anonymous passenger who had posted a blurry photo of Lila's tear-streaked face after the first punch. "Once it's out there, he can't control all of it," Ethan said quietly. The hashtag gathered momentum. With it came direct messages, some supportive, others cruel. And then, amid the noise, a private message from a woman in Chicago. Something similar happened to me on a flight last year. Same man. I couldn't speak up then. I'm ready now. Monique read it twice. There are others. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we don't have to fight this alone. By late afternoon, Ethan had called in 2 trusted friends from his military days. Devin Miles, a cybersecurity expert, arrived first. A lean man with quick eyes and quicker fingers on a keyboard. Then came Layla Chen, a former military intelligence officer with a knack for finding people who didn't want to be found. They met in the hotel's small business lounge. Laptops glowed under the low lights, coffee cups scattered among them. This is a pattern, Devin said, scrolling through records. 3 prior incidents, all settled with NDAs, victims silenced, evidence scrubbed. Airlines? Ethan asked. 2 of them, both with financial ties to Hanover's company. Layla leaned forward. If we can link those incidents to him publicly, NDAs or not, we put pressure on the system. People don't like the look of repeat offenses, especially against women and children. Monique listened, her hands wrapped around a cooling cup of tea. She had never been part of anything like this. A coordinated effort, a team with a shared goal. It was both daunting and, for the first time since the flight, a little hopeful. Outside the window, Denver's winter dusk settled over the city. Streetlights blinked on, one by one, small circles of illumination in the growing dark. Ethan looked around the table. This isn't just about Lila anymore. It's about making sure the next person doesn't have to go through what she did. Monique nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in her chest. Then let's start. The news cycle moved fast, but the hashtag had justice for Lila refused to fade. What had started as a single passenger's blurry snapshot and a few indignant tweets was now a steady stream of posts, personal accounts, and commentary. The more Hanover's team tried to push their version of events, the more ordinary people online pushed back. In a conference room high above downtown Chicago, Hanover sat at the head of a polished walnut table. The walls were lined with framed awards and photographs of him shaking hands with politicians and CEOs. Across from him, his lead attorney, James Preston, slid a folder across the table. "They're building a case around public sympathy," Preston said. "The mother's a pediatric surgeon, single parent. The optics are terrible for us." Hanover didn't look at the folder. He swirled the ice in his glass instead. "Then change the optics. Find something in her past, a lapse, a complaint, anything that makes her look unstable." Preston hesitated. "We have to be careful. If we push too hard, it could backfire in court." Hanover's eyes hardened. "I don't pay you to be careful. I pay you to win." In Denver, the mood in the hotel business lounge was very different. Monique sat with her laptop open, scrolling through the latest messages in the foundation email Devin had set up to collect tips. Another message pinged in. She read it aloud. "My name is Angela Reyes. I was a flight attendant on a Westridge corporate charter 2 years ago. Hanover grabbed my arm when I told him to turn off his phone. The airline told me to drop it or lose my job." Layla leaned over. "That's the 4th in 2 days." Detective Morales scribbled notes in her worn leather pad. "If even half of these agree to give statements, we can establish a clear pattern of behavior. NDAs don't block criminal reporting." Ethan studied the map of connections Devin had pulled up on a screen. Airlines, corporate boards, political donations. He's woven into everything. That's why nobody stopped him before. Monique looked at Lila, curled up in an armchair with a coloring book. "Then we make sure they can't ignore him this time." The preliminary hearing drew more attention than anyone expected. By the time Monique arrived at the courthouse with Ethan, Layla, and Morales, news vans were already lined up along the curb. Reporters called out questions. Cameras clicked in rapid bursts. Inside, the air was cooler, but no less charged. Hanover sat at the defense table, his navy suit immaculate, silver hair perfectly combed. He looked every bit the successful executive. Judge Evelyn Martinez presided, known for her no-nonsense demeanor. She listened as Preston painted Hanover as the victim of a coordinated campaign of defamation. When it was the prosecution's turn, Assistant DA Carla Jennings stood. "Your Honor, this case is about a man who believes his wealth entitles him to harm others without consequence. We have multiple witnesses, including airline staff, who saw him strike a 7-year-old child." The first witness was Lauren Brooks, the flight attendant. She took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been flying for 12 years. I've seen difficult passengers. But Mr. Hanover wasn't just difficult. He was aggressive, and he targeted that child from the moment he sat down." Preston tried to rattle her. "Isn't it true you're currently involved in a labor dispute with the airline?" "Yes," Lauren said evenly, "and that has nothing to do with what I saw with my own eyes." Her testimony set the tone. One by one, passengers stood to confirm what they'd witnessed. 2 even produced short video clips from their phones. Hanover's jaw tightened. He leaned toward Preston. "Shut this down." Preston whispered back, "I'm trying." The most dramatic shift came when the prosecution introduced a sealed deposition from Angela Reyes, the former flight attendant who had contacted Monique. Preston shot to his feet. "Objection! This violates her NDA." Judge Martinez looked over her glasses. "An NDA does not bar testimony in a criminal matter. Overruled." As Angela's account was read aloud, Hanover's verbal abuse, the physical intimidation, the courtroom grew still. Ethan watched Hanover closely. He saw the man's shoulders stiffen, his breathing quicken. He recognized the signs, control slipping. Then it happened. Hanover stood abruptly. "This is a farce. You think you've won?" He turned, locking eyes with Monique. "I will make sure you never practice medicine again. I will take everything you have." Gasps rippled through the room. Judge Martinez's gavel struck sharply. "Mr. Hanover, sit down immediately, or I will hold you in contempt." Hanover took a step toward the plaintiff's table. Ethan was already moving. He didn't touch Hanover, just stepped into his path, body a calm, solid barrier. "Not a good idea," he said quietly. Court officers converged. Judge Martinez's voice was firm. "Bail is revoked. The defendant will be remanded into custody pending trial." Hanover's face flushed with fury as the officers led him away. Cameras flashed. The image of a once untouchable executive being escorted from the courtroom would be on every evening newscast. Monique exhaled slowly. For the first time since that morning on the plane, she felt the balance shift. Not completely, but enough to know they were no longer alone in the fight. Winter in Denver gave way to spring before the trial concluded. The courtroom had become a second home for Monique, a place where she balanced the demands of testimony, cross-examinations, and the quiet, steady work of caring for Lila's healing, both visible and invisible. The trial was shorter than many expected. Hanover's attorneys fought hard, but the accumulation of witnesses and corroborating incidents from other victims chipped away at the carefully polished facade. Each account told a similar story: the arrogance, the belittling, the belief that rules applied only to others. When the verdict came, the jury's decision was unanimous: guilty of assault on a minor, witness intimidation, and perjury. Hanover was sentenced to 18 months in state custody. For a man used to penthouses and private jets, the gray walls of a prison cell were a different kind of confinement. For Monique, the sentence was only part of the justice. The rest came in the changes that followed. Within weeks, SkyWest Airways, under pressure from public outcry and shareholder questions, announced a comprehensive review of its passenger incident protocols. The old high-value customer policy, which had allowed executives like Hanover to bully without consequence, was scrapped. Airline crews received new training on de-escalation, anti-discrimination, and the legal obligation to report incidents, no matter who the passenger was. Lauren Brooks was promoted to a supervisory role, tasked with helping design and implement the program. Monique, inspired by the support she'd received and the stories she'd heard from other victims, launched the Lila Carter Foundation, dedicated to providing advocacy and counseling for children affected by violence and discrimination in travel environments. The foundation's first event was held in a modest community center in Denver. Rows of folding chairs filled with parents, social workers, and children. Some had lived their own versions of what had happened on Flight 237. Others were there simply to listen, to understand. Monique spoke plainly. Justice is not just a courtroom verdict. It's the systems we change so others won't have to endure the same harm. She looked toward Lila, sitting in the front row beside Ethan. It's the message we send to our children, that their safety matters as much as anyone's comfort. Ethan had stayed in Denver long after the trial ended. Officially, he was helping the foundation set up its security and crisis response protocols. Unofficially, he had come to value the quiet, steady connection that had grown between him and Monique. One afternoon, he found Lila in the foundation office, coloring at a low table. She held up her drawing, a plane in the sky, passengers of all colors and ages holding hands inside. "It's what I want it to be like," she said. He smiled. "That's a good mission statement." Her eyes lit up. "What's that?" "It means you've got the right idea, and now you just have to work to make it real." Lila considered this seriously, then went back to coloring. The day SkyWest launched its new policies, Monique and Lila were invited to speak at the airline's headquarters. Standing at a podium flanked by company executives and crew members, Monique told the story, not with anger, but with the measured cadence of someone who knew the power of truth spoken plainly. No passenger should be unsafe because of their race, age, or background, and no employee should fear for their job if they tell the truth about what happened on their flight. The applause that followed felt different from the polite clapping at a corporate event. It carried sincerity, perhaps even a hint of collective atonement. A year after that morning on the plane, Monique and Lila boarded another flight, this time to Chicago, for a foundation fundraiser. At the gate, a flight attendant recognized them. "Dr. Carter, it's an honor to have you on board. Your story changed how we handle passenger safety." On the plane, Lila's small shoulders tensed for a moment as they settled into their seats. Ethan, traveling with them, leaned over. "Remember your breathing?" She nodded, inhaling slowly for 4 counts, holding it, then exhaling for 4 more. Her posture eased. She glanced out the window. "Will we go above the clouds again?" "Yes, baby," Monique said, smiling softly. "We'll go so high, you might even see angels." That summer, the foundation hosted a children's art exhibition. Lila's newest piece hung in the center, an airplane cabin filled with smiling passengers, sunlight streaming through the windows. In the middle stood a tall figure with a subtle cape, her way of drawing Ethan, standing quietly between 2 seats, keeping watch. At the opening reception, Detective Morales raised a glass. "To standing up, even when it's hard, and to the long arc of justice, it bends, but only if we keep pulling." Monique met Ethan's gaze across the room. For the first time, she felt the chapter truly closing, not with vengeance, but with a sense of balance restored. And for Lila, the sky was wide open again. There's a certain stillness that settles in after a long storm, the kind that lets you hear your own heartbeat again. In the end, it wasn't the courtroom gavel or the flash of cameras that stayed with you. It was the small, steady signs of healing, a child who could look out an airplane window without fear, a mother who could speak the truth without trembling, and a quiet protector who understood that courage often walks in without an announcement. You could almost picture them in some distant future, boarding another flight together, the past folded neatly away like an old boarding pass. The heart of this story rests in something both simple and profound. We are reminded not to measure another soul by what they wear, where they sit, or the shade of their skin, but by the steady measure of their actions. Dignity is not loud, but it is firm. Standing up for what's right, especially when no one else will, can change the course of more than one life. And from the very fabric of injury, it's possible to stitch something new. Policies that protect, voices that join in, and a renewed strength within the Black community that says, "We see you, we believe you, and you matter." Well, perhaps you've witnessed it yourself in a neighborhood dispute, a workplace misunderstanding, or a stranger's cold glance, that moment when judgment tries to take the lead before truth even enters the room. In those moments, it helps to recall that decency can be as quiet as offering a seat, as subtle as listening before speaking. The story we've just walked through is one thread in a larger cloth, woven from countless acts of resolve and grace within the Black community and beyond. Like a lighthouse that doesn't chase the storm but stands its ground, steady in the dark, a single, steadfast choice to protect another can guide many safely to shore. It is worth noting that this change did not arrive with fanfare. It came in the unglamorous hours of testimony, the guarded emails, the whispered encouragements in courthouse hallways. It came in the Black community finding a way to turn shared pain into shared power, leaning on both memory and hope. The victory was not a final chapter, so much as a reminder that justice is a long road, best traveled together. So perhaps, as you finish listening to this, you'll think back to a time you chose to look past someone's appearance and truly see them. Or maybe you'll remember when someone did the same for you and how it shifted your footing just enough to keep going. If this story touched a place you've kept quietly in your own heart, consider passing it along, not as a headline, but as a small ember of warmth for someone else who might be standing in the cold. Because sometimes, all it takes is one light in a darkened window to remind us that the night will not have the last word.